Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand we're still exclusively on part one, is that correct?
Correct.
I just want to address systematically two clauses at least in part one and offer some comments. If I look in the Act, sir, to clause 3, headed purpose, and essentially the purpose of the Act is to A, provide for the replacement of the elected members of the Canterbury Regional Council with commissioners who will act as the Council's governing body until new elected members come into office following the next election. Mr. Chairman, the Minister could have used his powers under the Resource Management Act to appoint commissioners to take over all the functions, powers and duties of councillors in relation to water, if that was the government's main concern. That would have allowed democratic governance to continue in relation to the Council's other statutory responsibilities, particularly public passenger transport and air quality, where it has led New Zealand in regional land transport coordination and planning and pests and biosecurity. I mentioned yesterday in the second reading that the functions that pertain to New Zealand local and regional councils were far wider than the excessively narrow focus that was brought to bear in the Creech report upon the alleged imperfections of the Canterbury Regional Council. It could have been done another way. It could have been done in a way that met the stated concerns that generally are shared pertaining to water management. It isn't perfect. It has not been perfect. But the overriding principle of democracy, local democracy in New Zealand, could have been respected at the same time. Democracy, the principle of democracy, sir, is not something that can be blithely calibrated according to other concerns, including economic growth, including irrigation, including the expansion of dairy. Democracy is a principle that has its own intrinsic merit. It is not calibrated or qualified in any way by anything. And this government has proceeded to do so. I look at clause 3B, and it provides for the Council with certain powers re water management. As the ECAN Chief Executive, Dr. Brian Jenkins, confirmed in the morning report today, ECAN first requested additional powers in relation to at-risk catchments and aquifers, where the allocation is at or over sustainability limits. He did that 4 years ago. The Ministry for Environment has been deaf to requests for improvement to the RMA, such as the provision for catchment-specific moratoria. The government's commitment to the Canterbury Water Management Strategy as a way forward comes across as rather shallow in this respect and not substantive. Requires the Commissioner to have particular regard to, quote, the vision and the principles of the strategy. This is motherhood and apple pie. The substance of the strategy is in the targets. They have been revised with involvement of stakeholders since the strategy was released last November, and it is now out for public comment. Simply having regard to the vision and principles is not what ECAN and the Canterbury Water Management Strategy Steering Committee have sought in terms of mandating legislation. They have sought that the RMA be amended so that decision makers give weight to the regional and zonal implementation programs to be developed by the stakeholder committees in each of the 10 water management zones across the region. These implementation programs will put the strategy, vision and the principles and targets into practice. It could have been done that way. And finally, let us look at clause 4, interpretation, on the following page. And we see there is a so-called definition of ECAN in this clause. Ah.
I call the Honourable Toh Hinadi.